Today we're going to make the perfect low-protein loaf of bread. I know that many of you use a bread machine to make these loaves of bread, and I'm going to start with that today. However, there's a couple key success points that I like to use. I actually don't bake my bread completely in the bread machine. I will turn it out into loaf pans. But even to get a good dough, I think there's some key points that you need to think about when you're working with bread dough. As you can see here, I have a typical bread machine with the inside container where the bread will actually proof. And one key success factor to this is actually preheating this before you put your ingredients in. If you live in the north like I do, warming this up with some warm water to get it up to temperature before you add your ingredients will make bread making a lot easier for you. So I'll actually fill this up with hot water and dump it out, and then I'll put it back into my bread machine so that it's preheated before I even turn the machine on. Next thing you're going to do is you're going to take your dry ingredients. In this case, it's wheat starch. And then you're going to take your other ingredients like your yeast, your fiber, and your salts, and mix those around well. Combine them well with the other dry ingredients. And just let that set for a second. Then you're going to take your preheated water, and I like to use water that's roughly 95 to 100 degrees in temperature. That's slightly warmer than body temperature, so when you run your hand under your faucet, it should feel kind of warm on your fingertips. And you're going to place that into your bread machine. And then you're going to add some kind of sweetener. I prefer to use honey, but you could use maple syrup, anything like that. And the reason for the sugar product in there is that yeast, they're a living organism. They love sweet things, and they love to feed on that. And that is actually what makes your bread rise. And then oil. And a lot of times I'll actually come in here to make sure that that oil and honey and water is well combined so that it's not just a big glob of oil sitting on the bottom or a big glob of maple syrup or honey sitting on the bottom of the pan. Then I'll take my dry ingredients and carefully put them into the bin inside the bread machine. And part of the reason for pre-mixing all of this initially is so that your yeast is not all sitting in one spot and everything's well mixed in there with the dry ingredients. Close your machine and set it for the prescribed proof time on your specific machine. Check your owner's manual for directions. In this case, it's going to proof for about 90 minutes or so, and let it do its job by proofing and rising the way you need it to. And after about 90 minutes, you're going to open up your bread mixer, and you're going to find a nice warm loaf of bread dough. What I like to do is I like to pour a little bit of oil onto the work surface, and I'll turn my dough out onto that work surface, okay? And you can see that it's nice and it's nice and spongy, okay? And it's warm to the touch. That's the active yeast working there, creating that heat. So that's what you want. So I'm going to flatten that out, and then I'm going to take a little bit more oil and put it on top, and just kind of smooth it around. And what I'm doing here is I'm using actually my fingers to feel if there's any lumps in the dough. I want it to be nice and smooth. I'm working that around. Then I'm going to take my bench scraper and just make sure that I get my loaf into a nice ball. And I'm going to knead this just for a minute. And it might seem a little oily, but I really think that this additional oil in here creates a nice crunchy golden brown loaf of bread. Now what I'm going to do is basically just kind of toss this in my hand. And what I'm looking to do is create like a football shape. And doing this kind of works the dough around and gives it a nice football shape. You don't want any big cracks exposed. So if you have a seam like right here, you might want to put that down on the bottom of the loaf pan. I'm going to put it in there. And what I'm going to do now is actually run my fingers on top of this loaf to kind of make it nice and smooth. That will actually help form the top layer of crust on this bread loaf. The great thing about this dough is you can make it in double batches. You can actually take this and make a loaf of bread, save part of it and make pizza crust. It's very versatile. It's not just for making loaf bread. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take it back to the oven, and we're going to put it in a warm oven to proof again for an additional 15 to 20 minutes. And a warmed oven to me means if you have a gas oven, you'll leave the pilot light on. For an electric oven, turn it on high for 3 to 4 minutes, then turn it off. Once our oven has been proofed and we proof our bread in the oven, we're going to turn our oven up to 375 and bake for 35 to 40 minutes. At that time, we should have a nice golden loaf of bread, and your house will be full of that great bread baking smell. Our bread has been baking for about 40 minutes. I'm going to take it out. And we're going to turn it onto the cooling rack to cool. And as you can see, it's a nice dark golden brown in color. And you want to let it cool here for quite a few minutes. Now, you can actually freeze slices individually, or you can freeze the whole loaf once it's been sliced. And they'll stay in the freezer for 3 to 6 months with no problems. However, this bread is so good that it lasts only a week or so at my house. So enjoy.